For those of you who have heard Mark Brewer before, you know what a treat you have in store. And for those of you who haven't, you're in for a treat. So we've got just a couple little sort of businessy things to do. First, it's not a formal meeting, but because we don't have a membership meeting in July, we realized this was the last chance we had to indicate what's on the ballot. And we usually do that before an election. So in just a moment, Sandy's going to go over that. We, just so you know, we've got our local guides up here that have all the local candidates and their answers that you can also find on Vote 411. You're welcome to those. The other thing I just want to bring up is that because we're having a primary election, as you all know, right, August 4th, and the league, the Marquette League, provides observers to the Board of Canvassers. And the Board of Canvassers are the people who certify the vote in each county. And we actually cover Marquette, Alger, Dickinson, and Schoolcraft counties. The league in Michigan has been doing this as a project, actually started by our speaker, Mark Brewer. And we try to cover all the counties in Michigan, and we come close. So we have information. There's training for it. If you're interested in being an observer, you can write this down or talk to me. Basically, if you go to voter services at LWVMI for League of Women Voters Michigan.org, you can indicate your interest and they will send you the links to the training. But you do have to complete 3 modules of training set up by our speaker before you can be an observer. And the observing happens, will start the day after the vote, so August 5th. So you have time to do that if you'd like. You can talk to me, you can talk to David Allen, who is our sort of the chief of our observers and heading up the whole effort out of Marquette.
And if anybody wants to go over to Iron County, which is Iron River,
That's true.
We would love to have someone. I know that's a little bit of a hike, but if there's somebody interested in doing that, that's a hole that we still have.
That's true. And this should only be one day each place for the primary. But this is kind of a practice and a warm-up for the general elections. And we really want to be covering all those counties in the general election. And it'd be nice to have more than one person, at least for Marquette or the closer counties, so you can do shifts. So that's what we have to say. So I'm going to ask Sandy Breitenbach to come up, and she's going to tell us about what's on our ballot.
All right. Well, hi, I'm Sandy Breitenbach, and I kind of organize the Vote 411 guide. So one thing I want to start out before we go over what's on the ballot is to see your own personal ballot. I know there are different websites that you can go to. You can go to the Secretary of State and see what the ballot looks like. Put in your address. But when you go to the League's Vote 411 site, it's vote411.org, you can see what's on your ballot, and we ask questions, unbiased questions of the candidates, and they answer them so you can compare the different candidates. And a lot of times they'll put their website there for you to go to and get more information. So it's a nice place to go and compare. And also there's some information that you will need for as you're preparing to vote in this election. Is several people have dropped out, but they are still on the ballot. And you're not going to see that when you get your ballot. So you really want to be careful who you're voting for, because they might have dropped out. So be aware of that. And if you go to the Vote 411 site, right next to their name it says withdrawn. So I just wanted to say that right at the beginning. The second thing before I start going over quickly what's on the ballot is that this is a Michigan primary. And so you're going to have one side of the ballot is Republican and one side is Democrat. And if you cross over, you can pick whichever side you want, but you have to stay in that lane. If you cross over and vote for somebody in the other lane, all of your votes in the partisan section will not count. And if you're going in and putting your ballot in, if you go vote early or if you go on election day, you're gonna get warned of that if you did it. But if you send in your absentee ballot, you're anonymous by the time you're going into the machine, and so it's not going to get corrected. And unfortunately, if you already voted for someone who dropped out and you sent in your absentee ballot, there's no way to get to it now. Yesterday was the last day to go to the clerk and try and get it back. However, if you have your absentee ballot and you filled it out and you filled it out for somebody that has dropped out and you want to change it, you can still do that. You take the ballot in to an early voting place, you go to the clerk's office, or even on election day, and they'll spoil that ballot and let you vote again. Does that make sense? Because it's kind of confusing. Okay, so just very quickly, I'm not going to go through all the names in that, but we've got, in the partisan section, we've got race for governor, and so we have 2 Democrats, and we have 2 Republicans that are still on the ballot. But there's going to be 4 Republicans on that ballot. And Cox and Nesbitt have withdrawn, so make sure you realize that if you're voting in that section. For congressional U.S. Senator, for the Dems, there are 3 people on the ballot. One of them has dropped out, and that's McMorrow. So again, be aware of that when you go. On the Republican side, there's 1 candidate, and so there's no difficulty there. For representation in Congress, District 1, there are 3 Democrats and 3 Republicans on the ballot for that. State Senator, there are there's 1 in the Dem side and there's 2 candidates running in the Republican side. And let's see, for our 109th, there's just 1 on both Democrats and Republican. For District 1 of Marquette, so there's going to be some county races for county commissioner. For District 1, which is the city of Marquette precincts 3 and 4, there are 2 people on that ballot. For District 3, there are 3 people on the ballot. So if you're in one of those districts, that's going to show up on your ballot. If you're not, it's not going to show up. There's also a delegate section at the bottom of your ballot. And so I work at the AV counting board, and what we see frequently is people will stay in their lane and they get down to those delegates. And I don't know if people just say, oh, I know that person, I'm going to vote for them. And they switch over and everything in their partisan ballot is spoiled. So it's a really important thing to keep in mind. Don't spoil your ballot. And then we have a county race for judge. And so there are 3 candidates on that. They're on our league YouTube website. You can get to it, right, Laura, from our website and just going to YouTube. There we did a forum. If you get a chance to go to each of the forums, great. If you didn't, you can go watch the video. So there was a forum for county commissioner, both at the same time. And there's also a forum for the judges. So I think that's it. And again, I just want to really emphasize Vote 411. If you go to the website, you can see everything that's on your ballot. The print guides that we have here are local races, okay? So, and you can see the local races when you go online as well. Any questions? Yay, thank you.
We are working on the microphone problem. We're trying to get a wired mic. But now we're going to proceed, and Pri is going to formally introduce our speaker.
I'll try to use my courtroom voice. Mark Brewer is a distinguished attorney, and he's a partner with the law firm of Goodman Acker. He's known for his pro bono work. Pro bono, for those of you that don't know, is when they donate their time for various state and national organizations, including the ACLU and the League of Women Voters of Michigan. For the Michigan League, his work has included work on redistricting, voting rights, and election protection. Mark's pro bono work ranges from defending free speech to advocating for voting rights. His commitment to justice has earned him prestigious accolades, including the Champion of Justice Award from the Michigan Association for Justice and Distinguished Service Award from the Michigan Education Association. Mark has been honored by the State Bar of Michigan and the ACLU of Michigan for his many pro bono contributions. His legacy is one of unwavering advocacy and service to his community. We are so pleased to have you, Mark, and I also want to send a thank you on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Marquette County to the Community Foundation of Marquette County for the grant that made this program possible. And if you would like to support our programs, especially our voter services, there's a little donation. You can always become a member. We'd love to have you become a member. You don't have to do everything, but if you support our goals, we would love to have you become a member. And now I turn it over to Mark Brewer. Give her without a mic.
Well, good evening, everybody. I'll do my best to project as well. Thank you. That was such a lovely introduction. I really, really appreciate that. I appreciate the invitation from the league to be here. I think we're in danger of making this a tradition because I think this is the second time I've been up. I love to visit the Upper Peninsula. When I was party chair, I was up here at least a score of times. Over the course of my tenure, I just really love the Upper Peninsula and Marquette. So we made a special effort to try to make this work, and I was telling Pri this morning, it's a minor miracle that my schedule permitted this to actually happen. So, but I'm glad I'm here, and I really appreciate it. I want to take a moment to acknowledge and recognize the league. I don't know if any of you know this. The Michigan League actually is older than the National League of Voters. This was organized before the National League of Women Voters. And the league in Michigan is frankly irreplaceable in terms of the work that they do. From candidate guides and forums, you heard a little bit about that tonight. They lobby for election reform in Michigan. They litigate, and I've had the honor of representing the league in a number of those cases. And you heard about the monitoring program for the canvassing boards. That program is so important that we in the election protection community generally and the state government depend on that program, because those are our eyes and ears in those canvassing boards post-election to make sure that everything is done properly, and if problems develop, they're able to alert those of us in the election protection community to deal with those problems. So as I said, the league is really irreplaceable in terms of what it does, and I just really want to recognize and thank them for their ongoing work. It's just so important to making our democracy function. So tonight what I want to do is cover 3 election topics and then take questions. I'll just ask that everybody be cognizant of the league's tax exempt status, and it cannot engage and host forums in which we get into partisan politics. There's obviously lots of things we could talk about without getting into partisan politics. But we'll do a question and answer session at the end for as long as my hosts will permit. And I'll be glad to talk to people privately afterwards as well. So we'll do the question and answer at the end. The 3 topics I want to cover are threats to election integrity in Michigan. And in Michigan, frankly, it's basically a variation of what we're seeing nationally. I'm going to talk a little bit about the ballot proposals that could be on the ballot this fall. And, thank you. And with some hopeful news, some election reforms which are kind of in the pipeline that I think we'll see, and I hope we'll see over the next couple of election cycles. So with that, I'm going to launch into this.
We have one.
Ah,
We should
Mike.
need a mic before we do
Great. Try to stay close to it so you can hear me. All right, hopefully that's a little better. I see some head shaking. No. It's on. Maybe I should just hold it.
Is it coming up? It sounds like it is.
I can hear the
Yeah.
noise through the mic.
We try now?
Is that better? There we go. Now we have it. Yay. Okay. Now I'll avoid the feedback as well. Okay. So we'll try to balance this out here, and if all else fails, I'll drop the mic. So there are a lot of threats to election integrity. Artificial intelligence is one. Any of you that are watching the ads have already got AI-generated ads, many of them misleading, unfortunately. There's always the threat of foreign interference in our elections, and generally the federal government has done a very good job of protecting against that. And typically what that's involved over the last several cycles has been attempts to influence elections, particularly online. But frankly, the biggest threat is now the federal government, frankly, under the current president. It used to be that we election advocates and all of us, all of you, no matter what party, or if you don't believe in a party, we could depend on the federal government to always be there as an advocate for election rights, generally. On election day, between elections and so forth, that has changed dramatically. The president has turned the federal government into basically his personal device. The president has turned that into his personal device to basically manipulate the elections in this country and threat the elections, frankly. So I want to focus on the threat that the federal government has become, but also it has manifestations in every state, and I want to work through that. But I think the way to approach that is, it can be overwhelming. I mean, I practice election law full-time, all year round. My job is to stay on top of this, and even for me, it's overwhelming, and I can imagine what it's like for all of you. We're just bombarded constantly. This development, that development, this federal department's doing this, et cetera, et cetera. So to kind of give you a context and an organizing approach to this thing, so it's less confusing, I want to try to give you three goals that I think the president is pursuing. And as you see things happening in the election context, I think if you look at these three goals and you can place what you're seeing and hearing in the context of these goals, it'll make much more sense. It may seem random what the president and the federal government are doing, but it's not. There's a very organized effort by the federal government, led by the president, to really disturb the integrity of the election in a variety of ways, which I'll get to. So with the three organizing principles that I would suggest that you look at would be this. First, and I'm going to say this, the president's goal is to suppress the vote of Democrats in the country. There's no doubt about that. I mean, this is a very partisan matter. The polling and every other indication indicates that this could be a very good year for Democrats. You know, cycles change, things go up and down, but all the data would indicate that Democrats stand to do very well this year. What's one way, even though a little legitimate way, to try to push back against that? Suppress the Democratic vote. Discourage Democrats from voting in a wide variety of ways, and I'll talk about some of them tonight. I think that it is one of his goals, and he's been pretty open about that, frankly, in terms of a number of things that he's done. The second goal that I think he has, and is demonstrated by what he's done, is to lay the groundwork for federal intervention in the general election, either before the election, on election day, or even after election day. So again, as you watch and listen and see what's going on, think about how this is playing out. And if you make these accusations that the elections don't have integrity, there are problems, et cetera, you're laying the groundwork to try to justify the federal government intervening. And finally, I think what he's trying to do as well is to raise doubts about the integrity of our elections so that if his party doesn't do well, then he can claim, well, you know, there were election integrity problems, these results weren't accurate, et cetera, and raise doubts about the validity of the results as well. So I think, as I watch and observe and talk to folks, I think those are his 3 goals. And I think everything that's going on fits into one or more of those categories. So keep those categories in mind, and I want to review with you briefly a number of the things that he's doing. And please keep those goals in mind. So let's consider federal legislation. We've heard a lot about the SAVE Act, and there's been a lot of controversy about that. This is a federal law, would be a law if they passed it, that would require proof of citizenship documentation in order to vote in this country. Extraordinary piece of federal legislation, traditionally in this country, legally and otherwise. Elections are run by and large by state and local governments. This would be an extraordinary addition to that whole scheme. This is a very rare, it's not even a problem, I wouldn't even call it a problem. We don't have a non-citizen voting problem in this country. Are there occasionally non-citizens who vote? Yes, but they get caught and they get prosecuted. So this is really a solution in search of a problem, as we say. But the real goal here, if you look at the SAVE Act's requirements, is that it would discourage a wide variety of groups and people from voting. Documentation of citizenship, and this would apply to all of us, by the way. None of us are going to be grandfathered in. Even if you've been voting in this country for 50, 60 years, you're gonna, before you can vote again, if this were to become law, you're gonna have to provide documentary proof that you are a citizen of the United States. And the groups that will be most affected by this tend to favor Democrats in terms of who they vote for. The poor, minorities. One of the stunning things that people are starting to realize, women who've gotten married and changed their names, this is gonna be a real problem because your name doesn't match the name on your birth certificate, assuming you're able to find your birth certificate. So this is going to be a great imposition and a burden and block people from voting in large numbers all over the country were this to become law. Now it's been blocked in Congress so far, and increasingly it looks like the president is not going to be able to accomplish this goal this way, but he is trying in many, many other ways to do so as well. For example, he issued an executive order that attempts to instruct states not to accept mail ballots, and he's got this focus on mail voting we'll talk about in a little bit, unless that state has some system to make sure that only citizens are voting. So again, can't get the legislation through the Congress, let's try executive order and executive power to do it. Piece of this is that, again, his perception that mail ballots tend to help Democrats, and so we need to generally suppress people voting by mail. And again, this is another example of laying the groundwork for intervention. Say, well, Michigan doesn't really have an adequate system to make sure non-citizens vote. So the federal government needs to come in and do something about that before, on, or after Election Day. This order has been blocked so far by the courts, but it's still a lingering threat out there. Another approach that he has tried, we have at the national something called the Election Assistance Commission. This entity certifies our voting machines and provides federal registration forms and does other services for the states. Well, the president first tried to order this group to add to the voter registration form the citizenship requirement, back to citizenship. They refused, and then on top of that, the courts blocked it as well. So what did he do a few weeks ago? He fired all the members of the commission using his newfound authority to basically run the executive branch as he sees fit. We'll see how this all plays out, whether he's going to presume now to be the election commission or whether he's going to install new people who are going to do what he wants there. But again, you can see every route that is available in the federal government, Trump is attempting to exploit. And it doesn't just stop there. Let's talk about what some of the federal agencies are doing under his command. You know, traditionally in this country, and Pri and I were talking this morning about norms, how our democracy really depends not necessarily just on laws and regulations and the Constitution, but on norms, things we've come to do that aren't written down, but they've come to be regarded as practices that we follow because we should. Well, he has demolished a lot of those, and one of the ones he's demolished is the separation between the president and the Department of Justice. Even though the president has always appointed the Attorney General, there have been a lot of safeguards built up over the years, particularly in the wake of Watergate, where Nixon really tried to abuse the Department of Justice's powers, that insulate what the Department of Justice does from the president. Well, he's broken all those down. So now we have, for example, there are many examples of the Department of Justice. I'm going to go through a few of them. The Department of Justice requesting of every state, we want a copy of your voter rolls, unredacted. We want all of it, even private information. For many states, including Michigan, there are partial Social Security numbers and other very private information on that database. So they asked for this, and we think what they're trying to do is try to build a national voter database, again, unprecedented, and use that to achieve these other goals, like check and see, oh, Michigan, we've looked at your voter rolls, you have non-citizens on there. So we gotta do something about that, either voluntarily or more forcefully through the federal government. Fortunately, many states, including Michigan, have fought back on this, and the president is currently 0 for 15 in court actions trying to get these voter files. Michigan is actually the lead case in this regard. We're now at the federal appellate level, but they're not giving up, the Department of Justice. They are trying repeatedly to get their hands on these voter files. What else is the Department of Justice doing at the president's behest? They're actually going after ballots. We've long heard how the president insists, I was elected in 2020, right? And so whatever may have officially happened, he never believes it. And so now in places like Georgia, and more recently in Detroit, federal officials demand copies of the 2020 ballots because they're still attempting to prove that there were some shenanigans back in 2020. But this isn't about the 2020 election. This is about trying to find things in those ballots that will justify interference in next fall's election. Again, I come back to the three concepts that I started with, the three goals here. This isn't about 2020 anymore. It's about trying to find a way to interfere in the 2026 elections. Georgia is having their own fight with the feds on this. Detroit has refused to produce those ballots. We'll see how that all plays out as well. Another thing the Department of Justice is doing, and this again affects Michigan, they want to send monitors in to our primaries. Detroit, Hamtramck, Muskegon, and Lansing are the current targets. All of those cities have said these monitors are welcome. They can be observers, like any of you could walk into a polling place on election day, stand in a designated area, and watch what happens. That's fine. We don't have any problem with that. And they're welcome to do that because we have nothing to hide. But again, what we fear is that this is a predicate. This is a way to try to create the grounds to suppress the vote. Notice those 4 cities that I mentioned, all heavily Democratic. That's no accident that those cities are targeted. Minority populations, Democratic cities. And again, looking for evidence, something they can point to that justifies federal interference in those elections in the fall. So it's about gathering evidence from their perspective. The Postal Service, ubiquitous, provides important services. Now the president is attempting again on this citizenship route to use the Postal Service to monitor and stop people from voting absentee unless there's been some verification that they are citizens. So you can see he's using every mechanism that he can find, every agency he can use to try to get at controls of the elections. So far, this has been blocked by the courts, but if successful, this would be just devastating, right? I mean, we do a lot of voting by mail now. There are several states that only vote by mail. It's become very popular in Michigan, and this would be a huge problem in terms of disenfranchising a lot of folks. He's even using our national security agencies. We did have this Bill Pulte from Michigan who had absolutely no credentials to be involved in national security. All of a sudden he's head of the NDI. But it's very clear what he was trying to do, what Tulsi Gabbard was trying to do, was to try to find some information in the national security realm that demonstrated that foreign governments were interfering in our elections. Voila, that means the federal government has to do something. And that means getting involved in the administration at the local level. So again, consistent with the 3 goals: suppress the vote, create questions about the integrity of the vote, so that if his party loses, there are all these questions that are hovering out there. And we've seen other kind of things too. I'm not going to keep going. I think I've given you enough examples. You can kind of see where I'm going here. Department of Justice has even threatened to prosecute election officials, including Secretary Benson here in Michigan, because they're allegedly doing an inadequate job of keeping non-citizens off the voting rolls. Again, attempt to intimidate, coerce election officials who are simply doing their jobs. So we've talked about legislation, we've talked about executive action. I've given you several examples of the agencies that he's yoked to this effort. But there's also been litigation. I mean, they've been attempting to use the courts for this as well. The recent Calais case, which basically gutted the Federal Voting Rights Act, was brought by private parties, true, but the Department of Justice, here we go again, was supportive of what the Supreme Court ultimately did, which was basically eviscerate that part of the Voting Rights Act. And we've also seen a lot of cooperation in Michigan and elsewhere between private entities, not just the Republican National Committee. I'm going to tell you about a couple cases here in a minute, but there are a number of election denying organizations. In Michigan, there's one called the Michigan Fair Elections Institute, and they have brother and sister organizations that are all active in this election denial sphere. We've been dealing with them for years, but now they are actively cooperating with the federal government. We believe there's data sharing going on, and they are coordinating their efforts to try to interfere and suppress the vote. Some of the cases that we've had here in Michigan, brought by the Republican National Committee, they've been attacking our regulation of challengers in polling places, attacking the rights of overseas voters here in Michigan, attacking procedures that are used to tabulate absentee ballots. And again, if you look at, their bias, their prejudice, particularly the president, his assumption is overseas voters tend to be voting Democratic. That's what he believes. Voting by mail tends to help Democrats. So we got to try to find a way to interfere in that process, question and challenge that regulation. Another of these, I won't call it private efforts, but it's certainly not a federal government effort, was what we've seen with partisan gerrymandering around the country, right? If we can't win the elections the old-fashioned way, let's rig the districts so that we can try to maintain control of the U.S. House. And then there's been, frankly, some success with that. I think they would have tried it here in Michigan, except thanks to the work of the league, and many of you, frankly, probably, in 2018, we had the Independent Redistricting Commission established here, and that's locked into the Constitution. Those districts are solid and will remain in place for the rest of this decade. So we didn't see that here, but it happened elsewhere in the country. So I could give you many, many more examples. What I've tried to do is pick some examples that illustrate the three concepts that I talked about. So as you watch what's going on, and I hope you help us prevent this from happening, I think you can see these three goals of the president in play. That's exactly what's going on here. This is coordinated, it's not accidental, but this is the path we are on. And I dread, frankly, in some ways, election day and the run-up to that, because the federal government has enormous power. We've seen that abused in the case of ICE, for example. I had a good friend of mine who recently was prosecuted. They ultimately dropped the prosecution, thankfully, for simply protesting outside an ICE facility in Chicago. But that's the power of the Department of Justice, the power of the federal government to basically, if they want to, arbitrarily prosecute people and bring the power of the federal government to bear. I've been part of simulation exercises, which you say, well, what if the military shows up on election day? What if the president attempts to federalize the Michigan National Guard? What do we do in those situations, right? And I get goosebumps even thinking about it. It's terrible that we even have to contemplate those kinds of scenarios. But this administration has forced us to do that, to plan for what used to be the unthinkable, in order to try to be ready in the run-up to the election and on election day for whatever he's got up his sleeve. With that, I do want to talk about ballot proposals, and then a little bit about reform efforts coming down the road, and then we'll open it up for questions, which I think you'll get far more out of than me sitting up here talking. Ballot proposals, we have a very interesting potential set of ballot proposals this year. Proposal 1, automatically on the ballot every 16 years, is the question of whether we should call another constitutional convention to either amend or completely revise our state constitution. This is automatically on the ballot every 16 years. Last several times it's been on the ballot is failed pretty overwhelmingly. And I just wanted to briefly describe how the process would work if this were to pass. First of all, we would hold partisan elections, primaries and generals, in the spring and fall of 2027 to elect delegates. Those delegates would come from the existing legislative districts, not gerrymandered, thankfully, because we got beyond that. And then that group of delegates would assemble, presumably in Lansing. There's no time limit imposed on their work, and they can either propose amendments to the Constitution or they can completely rewrite it. They're very autonomous once they assemble. The legislature can't interfere, the governor can't interfere, so they're very much an autonomous organization. Whatever product they produce, if any, is subject to voter approval. So it would be on a date they set, ratification of whatever they produce. The politics of this are a little interesting this time, and I just want to make these observations. That again, as I mentioned in the past, traditionally this has usually been defeated 60-40, somewhere along. But we're now seeing leaders like Speaker Matt Hall and other leaders of the Republican Party advocate for holding a convention. I can only speculate on their motives. Collectively, the League and many of us in the election protection world, we've amended the Constitution, right? The last several cycles. I mean, when I started in politics, and you all probably remember this, you basically couldn't vote absentee, right? Up until after 218. It's very, very difficult to vote absentee ballot. Now anybody can vote an absentee ballot. In 45 days over the election. Pop. I think we're doing okay until then.
Yeah.
Maybe I was being censored, I don't know. But, I mean, it's remarkable. There's been a revolution in voting rights in this state. We have early voting. Extraordinary. Nobody ever used to have early. Everybody used to vote on election day, basically, right? All kinds of safeguards have been built in terms of how elections are run. We have drop boxes, which are mandated, and then there's all kinds of great things that we put into the Constitution. Those are the kind of things that could be reversed by a constitutional convention. There have been other rights put in the Constitution as well. Reproductive freedom was made a part of our Constitution just a couple of years ago. That can be taken out as well, and obviously other things could be added. So we'll see how this all plays out, but I'd urge all of you to pay attention. I know you will, because you're all conscientious voters, to Proposal 1. Very serious consequences of a yes vote there. Second possible, but it's getting pretty close to being on the ballot, is Michiganders for Money Out of Politics. So you may have circulated a petition for that. Yesterday, the Board of Canvassers certified that for the ballot. It was very close, but they found that they had enough signatures to get on the ballot. This is a proposal which would say to state and local contractors, you can't make political contributions. It would also say to the major utilities in the state, you can't make contributions in politics. There are some disclosure provisions as well. So it's a comprehensive campaign finance reform proposal. The way our initiative system works now, starting yesterday, 40-day period started in which the legislature can adopt this proposal, straight up. They can't amend it, they can't change it, they can't tamper with it, but they can adopt it if they want. In that case, it would not go to the ballot, it would become law of Michigan immediately. If the legislature does nothing, they vote it down, whatever, it will go on the ballot, and we will see it as Proposal 2 or 3, depending on what happens with another proposal I'll talk about in a moment. So again, this is a very important proposal, whatever you may think about it. It's going to have a tremendous impact on Michigan politics if it's adopted, and there's a huge fight going on already. I've never seen the kind of legal resources devoted to beating a proposal like I saw yesterday. I'm not involved in this. These are not clients of mine. I'm watching very avidly, obviously. I mean, they had paid people, they being opponents, outside the Board of Canvassers meeting yesterday with signs. They had a battalion of attorneys trying to knock this thing off the ballot. They still may go to court. They have an option of doing that after yesterday's decision. And I think the politics here are going to be quite intense. These groups that are affected by this, starting with the utilities, are just not going to roll over and say, okay, you can take away my right to make contributions. So there's a big fight already going on, and another one that will follow, including, I think, if it passes, I think there'll be litigation challenging it. So we'll see how that all plays out. Final potential proposal is what I am involved in, so I want to be upfront about this, is the state equivalent of the SAVE Act that I talked about. In addition to all the other things I mentioned that the president is trying to do to impose a citizenship requirement, there's a private group that's been working around the country to put these proposals on the ballot in various states or to get legislatures to pass them so that they have a mini SAVE Act for a particular state. In Michigan, it's called American Citizens for Voting, but it does the same thing that the SAVE Act would do. It would impose a documentary proof of citizenship requirement on all of us if we want to vote. I've been a lawyer for some time now for the group that is opposing this because we think it will have all the terrible effects that I described earlier. We're about to start the process of reviewing the signatures of this proposal, and there'll be a couple of Board of Canvassers meeting in August. By the way, our Board of Canvassers now has televised meetings. If you're interested in watching, you can see how the sausage is made, I guess, in one way, at least in the ballot proposal world. And so we're starting to review those signatures to make sure they have enough. If we don't think they have enough, we'll have a challenge to those signatures, and this will play itself out as well. I think if this does make the ballot, there'll be a vigorous campaign, pro and con, about it. And this could have, again, tremendous impact on voting rights here in Michigan if it were to pass. So that's a quick summary of the ballot proposals. And then finally, I want to kind of end on a hopeful note. There are some reforms coming down the pike. Those of us in the election reform community, I include the league in this, we've always got a to-do list. You know, I think we've made tremendous progress. I say we, I mean, it's just tens of thousands of people have contributed to this. Redistricting reform, election reform, it's been an amazing effort over the last several years. But there are reforms we still need. And I want to talk about a couple of those. First, I think there's great energy behind an effort to move our primary earlier. And I think that makes sense, frankly, for this reason. Our current primary schedule, August and then a November general, given the election reforms we've made over the last several years, puts enormous pressure on the clerks. Absentee ballots have to be ready 45 days before the election, which means September, they have to have that. So you've got an early August primary and a mid-September date to have ballots ready to go to voters. I mean, they got to get printed and everything else in between. And so what happens is you have a canvassing process after the election. There could be recounts. There could be all kinds of other things that slow down that schedule. The schedule made sense and everybody voted on election day in August, right? And we didn't have all these other rights, particularly the right to vote early and the right to get an absentee ballot 45 days before the election. So there's going to be an effort to move the primary back perhaps to June or May. Other states do the same thing. California's primary, for example, is in June. That will push other dates back. But I think this is a reasonable accommodation. And then, again, I got clerks in this state on a bipartisan basis, in my view, and I've been practicing election law in this state for over 40 years, do a very good job across the board. They're very conscientious. They do it with integrity, as do all their workers. But there's only so much you can do, right? If you've got to handle hundreds of thousands of absentee ballots in a very short period of time. We now have same-day registration, right? It's a great thing. People can walk in on election day and register to vote, but that takes time, it takes resources, and so I think we need to stretch this out a little bit and give the clerks a little bit of a break. A second thing that I think may be on the horizon is the possibility of proportional voting for the legislature. This could solve, at least try to address several problems that we have. In the wake of the demise of the Voting Rights Act, we have a real serious problem with ensuring that minorities are adequately represented. I mean, I'll just be upfront about that. That's the purpose of the Voting Rights Act, and the Supreme Court has essentially gutted it. Proportional voting would help, I think, address some of that problem, particularly if we have multi-member districts. I'm a real geek about Michigan political history. I don't know if any of you know this. Michigan's state house, once had multi-member districts. In the 1950s, there were half a dozen state elections conducted in which the urban areas of the state, Detroit, Lansing, Flint, Grand Rapids even, had multi-member districts. And what would happen then is, there would be 2 or 3 member districts, and the top 2 or 3 vote getters would be elected, full-fledged members of the state house, full voting rights, everything else. Well, if you think about it, that enables a group that isn't 50% of the population, maybe they're only a third of the population, or even a quarter, could elect one of their own or somebody they prefer, may not be in the same race or the same ethnic group, but it's up to them to make that choice. So I think proportional voting in multi-member districts could help us solve some of these problems. It's also in some ways an answer to gerrymandering, even though I think we've done a pretty good job of that with the redistricting commission. But there's no reason why you can't do multi-member proportional voting districts and still have the commission. It's an important bipartisan, nonpartisan process to make sure the districts are drawn fairly. So that may be coming. I think you're going to hear more and more talk about that. And that was particularly provoked by what the Supreme Court did to the VRA just a few weeks ago. And then the final reform effort that I want to talk about, actually I have a handout on this if I could. Michigan once had, as did virtually every state in the country, something called fusion voting. Let me explain what that is. And some of you, if you ever lived in New York, I think Connecticut still has it, you may have actually experienced this. I've done these presentations and somebody popped up their hand, oh, I'm from New York, I've done this. This was a process whereby a political party, more than one political party can nominate the same candidate. Or if I put it another way, a candidate can be the candidate of more than one political party. So in New York, for example, there's a liberal party, and sometimes they nominate the same candidate as the Democrats. There's a conservative party. Sometimes they nominate the same candidate as the Republicans. What this does is it turns minor parties down, who basically, if you vote a minor party candidate, no disrespect to any of you who may be adherents of minor parties in Michigan, your vote is wasted, right? Because the minor party candidate isn't going to win. Bless you, you are being true to your principles by voting for that candidate. Maybe you believe in what the Libertarian Party or the Green Party, whatever the party may be, and you don't want to sacrifice those principles by voting for a Democrat or voting for a Republican, but you do sacrifice your vote if you vote for a candidate because they can't win under our current system. What this enables voters to do is to stick with their party and still cast an effective vote, right? I'll just give an example of this. Historically, I'll go back to New York. Franklin Roosevelt in New York was the candidate of the Democratic Party when he ran for president and the candidate of the Liberal Party. Well, the members of the Liberal Party thought, well, the Democrats aren't good enough for us. They're not liberal enough for us. But we can still vote for Roosevelt because he's on our party line. So we don't have to sacrifice our principles and vote Democratic, but we can vote for Roosevelt because he's on another party line. When this existed in Michigan, Michigan is actually one of the best examples of this practice in the entire country. There were tremendous efforts and successful efforts to create coalitions in the legislature. We had a populist party, we had a progressive party, we had a prohibition party, we had a working class party, and they would form coalitions with the various parties, and it worked. A lot of the progressive ideas and things that got adopted in Michigan in the late 19th century, early 20th century, came about because of these minor parties and the creative ideas that they had for reforming the system. 2 more examples, and then I'll be quiet, we'll take questions. The Republican Party was founded in Michigan. Wisconsin may say, no, it's our party. No, it was founded in Michigan. But if you look at Michigan history, here's what happened. There were a series of minor parties, the Liberty Party, the Free Soil Party, etc., that developed in Michigan and grew in the late 1840s and 1850s, and they became the Republican Party. That's an example of how fusion has worked in this state. Another example of that is what happened in Michigan in the 1880s and 1890s. This was a solid Republican state after the Civil War. If you were a Democrat, you were a traitor because you were the party of slavery. You were the party of the Confederacy. Nobody would be a Democrat. But what happened was these minor parties, there was a working party, there was a populist party, a progressive party. If they found the right Democratic candidate, they would say, well, we'll put you on our ballot as well. And we'll encourage our members to vote for you. The first Democrat elected governor in this state after the Civil War was a fusion candidate. He got elected only because these minor parties agreed to make him their candidate. And it happened a couple of times. So this benefits both parties. But I think the party system, and I'm a big believer in parties, I think you all know I'm chair of the party here for 18 years, has become really rigid and locked in. We need some dynamism in the system. I'm a believer in major parties, don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about a multi-party parliamentary democracy. That has its advantages, but I don't think it'll work here. But if we have truly empowered minor parties that can form coalitions and fusions with the major parties, I think it'll be a good thing for us as citizens in Michigan. So I'll get off my preacher's chair here. I will indicate the league supports this effort. The league is going to be filing, we filed a lawsuit to strike down Michigan's current ban on fusion voting. And the league is supporting us in that effort. They're not parties to the case, but they're going to file an amicus brief in support of us because they believe in this concept as well. So I just want to leave you with some of these reform ideas that I think are coming down the road and I think will make politics better in this state. With that, I'll be glad to take questions.
Do we have, anyone have cards?
I have one. Go ahead and just ask the question. About, I guess I'm wondering about fusion voting versus ranked choice voting.
Right.
You know, ranked choice, you can, just seems like it would solve so many of the problems.
Yeah, they're not incompatible, but they are different, right? You can have one and not the other, you could have both. And so this lawsuit is about letting voters and parties nominate the same candidate, regardless of whether we have RCV. Is that helpful? I'm just trying, I mean, they're different. They're not in conflict either. You can have both.
Okay.
We have one written one. Want me to
Okay.
try to read it?
Sure.
Okay, it flips up.
Ah, there we go. There's the straw. Okay, got it.
What do you think is the best or most effective counter messaging to the attacks on voting rights?
That's a great question, and I think we have to be very careful because part of what's going on is this enormous amount of misinformation, right? And we don't want to repeat the misinformation even as we try to rebut it, right? Because that just makes it worse. And so we're always very careful to rebut it in a positive way. If somebody talks about, well, the elections aren't accurate, well, you know, we do audits after every election here in Michigan. And every audit has shown everything was fine. After the 2020 election, like everywhere else in the country, there were lawsuits brought questioning the results. All those lawsuits were either dismissed or lost. So we try to address it from a positive perspective, talking about how transparent the system is. And you all probably know this. Election workers in every precinct are required to be balanced. There's supposed to be Democrats and Republicans there. Same thing on the canvassing boards, which the league is going to be monitoring. So in my view, it's impossible, frankly, to do an election conspiracy in this state because there are just far too many eyeballs on the process. And so that's what I would do. Emphasize the positive. Don't try to rebut point by point the misinformation. There's so many positives about our election. Talk about those.
What about proactive messaging instead of just responding to misinformation? Same
But
thing?
yeah, the question is about proactive. Absolutely. Get out there and praise the system. And talk about how well it works. Michigan, as you all probably know, is the most decentralized election system in the country. In many states, it's run at the county level. County clerks have a role here, but it's the local clerks who run things, and they do a fabulous job. So talk about what a great decentralized system we've had. We've had all these audits, we've had all these lawsuits, and nothing has ever come of that. Yeah, do it proactively. Op-eds online. I'm sure you'll provoke a debate if you try that, but that would be a good debate, I think, to have.
Who, in your opinion, are the people or entities that are behind the president's push to make all these changes?
Well, Frank, I mean, it's him, right? And all the people he's brought into the government, many of whom were his lawyers in his election denial efforts back in 2020 and even in 2016, there was a little bit of this, but certainly in 2020. So he's now brought them into the government. I mean, look at people like Todd Blanche and some of these other folks. They were his lawyers who were helping to try to, come up with these cockamamie legal theories and other things that they were trying to do. So he's brought them into the government. A number of the private actors, some of the groups that I mentioned, this so-called Michigan Fair Elections Institute, and again, I think we all know this. It's great to come up, it's easy to come up with an innocuous sounding pro-democratic name when in fact it's not, right? So you've always got to look behind who these groups are. There's a group called the Election Integrity Fund, which had kind of disappeared for a while in Michigan. They're back, but again, the name is very misleading. They're not about election integrity. They're about questioning and challenging our existing process and so forth. So they're principally inside the government now. They're leading the Department of Justice, Department of Homeland Security, etc. Yeah, Pri?
I remember watching the Board of Canvassers and how close it came to not certifying the election. What are the options if boards of canvassers just decide to, throw out or not certify elections?
Right. A little history here. In the 1950s, we had some very controversial recounts involving our then Democratic governor. And the election machinery in the state was in the hands of Republicans. To their credit, from what we can tell, there was no manipulation, and Soapy got reelected despite very, very close elections, very contentious elections. But to everybody's credit, they decided we need to change the election machinery in the state. That's where these bipartisan boards of canvassers came from, at the county level and at the state level. 4-member boards, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. They can only take action by majority vote, which means you got to have a bipartisan majority to do anything. And that system has worked very, very well for us since the 1950s. Again, lots of eyes on it, lots of safeguards. But then what we saw, as Pri's indicating, back in 20, in Wayne County, but there were other counties where this was tried, these board members would refuse to certify the results. That's their most important duty. They depend on all the work done by the local workers. Let's go over the math, make sure there are no mistakes, everything's been counted properly. But then they have what we call in the law, this ministerial duty to certify. That means you don't have any discretion. If everything is balanced and everything works out, you're supposed to certify. Well, in Wayne County, at the direction of Trump, 2 members of the board initially refused to certify the election. That would have been a disaster, frankly, not just in Wayne County, but what would have happened is that would have spread across the state. Other boards would have seen that and said, well, if they can do that in Wayne County, I can do it in Marquette County. Why can't I do that in Alger County? And there would have been a cascade across the state and maybe even across the country of these, sometimes they're boards in other states, sometimes they're single individuals, refusing to certify. So, I get goosebumps as I talk about this. That was a very scary night as we're all watching what was going on in Wayne County. Thankfully, in the end, they did the right thing. They changed their minds. Pri asked about remedies. We were prepared. I was sitting on a lawsuit, as were many others, to go to court, because the courts have been very clear over the years. These boards have no discretion. They have to certify. They just can't deviate from that function. We were prepared to go to court to do that. And then what we've done since then, and this was done in the 2022 amendments of the Constitution, we made it absolutely crystal clear that these boards have no discretion. If you read the section of the Constitution, it says they have the discretionary, mandatory duty to certify. And then we tell them the data they're to use to do that. So those would be the remedies, Pri, and we're always prepared to do that. That's one of the reasons why what the league does in terms of monitoring these boards is so important. Because sometimes these members give out signals. You get a member during the course of the canvass say, well, I don't think absentee voting is reliable. Or, I don't know about this precinct, there was something there. And so they give out hints that that's where they're going, and that lets us, if we know about it, get ready to go to court if necessary. Sometimes we get the Secretary of State, not Benson herself. The Secretary of State is separate from our election administration in the state. Though we get what's called the Bureau of Elections, make a phone call. Some of you have seen this, we've seen this. There's a new clerk down in Antrim County, election denier named Victoria Bishop. She got elected, and we've had election deniers now getting elected to clerkships and serving on these boards. And the Bureau stepped in and said, what she was doing was she was removing people from the voting rolls, which the county clerk has no authority to do whatsoever under any circumstances. And the Bureau stepped in and said, you're not gonna administer elections in Antrim County anymore. We just can't permit that. And there were a couple of incidents up here in the Upper Peninsula as well. I don't know if it was in Delta, if I recall correctly, where we had some of these board members kind of go rogue. And so the State Bureau of Elections has been very good about this and usually able to resolve it without us having to go to court. Sorry, Pri, for the long answer, but there are remedies and we take this very seriously.
Any questions?
Yes, ma'am.
So when the federal government took the ballots in Georgia, for example, and then they assigned hundreds of FBI agents to review them, what exactly could the FBI agents review? What could they do? What was the strategy or the purpose of that, other than to intimidate?
Well, I think intimidate's one of them. I think, again, to the extent they can, try to say, oh, we've got some non-citizens voting in Georgia, so therefore we need to intervene and play a role down here. Or, you know, the president recently lost a lawsuit on this. Oh, these ballots came in after Election Day, right? He lost that lawsuit, thankfully, but that's the kind of thing they would look for to try to justify future federal intervention.
But can you look at a ballot and see that a non-citizen voted that ballot?
Well, that's why you want the other data. I don't know the laws of other states. In Michigan, it would be impossible because once that stub at the top of the ballot's torn off, you can't trace the ballot at all. But I think that's the kind of thing they're looking for. Again, I don't know the system in Georgia. Maybe there is a way to identify the voters. And they've been very secretive, obviously, about I'm speculating about what they might be doing.
Do you think they're just calling our bluff, in a way?
Calling whose bluff?
Well, like the regular voters and saying, oh, well, this must be the case, but they have no documentation, no data to back it up.
Yeah, again, it's hard to tell. And you know, there's a lot of wild conspiracy theories floating around the federal government about all this stuff. And as I mentioned earlier, Trump's got these election deniers in the White House, running the Justice Department, and they're true believers, and they're going to keep digging until they think they find something to prove them right.
The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, what would the impact of that be on elections? And what was it in the past when Democrats were in power?
Well, I can't answer the second question. Even when I was party chair, I couldn't answer that question. The intention of that act was to restore some of the damage, frankly, that the Supreme Court had done before the Calais decision of this summer. I haven't looked at that act recently. It's probably been a couple of years since I've looked at it. I'm not sure that you could even enact that law given what the court said in Calais. And they just really gutted the Voting Rights Act. And basically, we're back to you have to prove intentional discrimination in order to justify any kind of remedy, and they've made that virtually impossible. Yeah.
So, worst case scenario, what would our options be if a national crisis were invented and national troops tried to disrupt the midterms?
I hate to even speculate about that in terms of what kind of clash we might get between Michigan State Police, Michigan local police. I mean, it's just, it's to be avoided at all costs.
But is anyone trying to look at that and
Yes.
come up with some ideas?
Right. I mean, again, there would be immediate court challenges in terms of the president's power to do this, right? I mean, there are reasons, obviously, to legitimately federalize the National Guard. Interfering in elections is not one of them. And the courts, to their credit, not all of them, but most of them, have been willing to look behind, some of the things he's done. This is a fabrication. There's no basis for this. But the President of the United States, the executive branch, has a lot of power, particularly in the area of foreign affairs. If they use some kind of foreign interference as a justification, courts tend to be more reluctant to intervene on that. But the president has lost a lot of credibility with federal courts, even with judges he's appointed, because of some of the things that have happened in the lawsuits that have resulted. Yeah.
When people debate requiring citizenship documentation to vote, it often comes down to how difficult it is, how expensive it is to get the proper documentation. Are the proposals, that we're gonna be voting on, is it clear what documentation is acceptable? And how easy or expensive is that?
They are listed. I'd urge you to look at the proposal. You can find the citizen voting proposal online at the Secretary of State's website under the Board of Canvassers page. The entire proposal is there. And there's a list of documents. And it's pretty narrow. It's basically a birth certificate or a passport. And there, I think less than half the population has a passport. And good luck if you were born a long time ago or in a different state, trying to get not a copy of your birth certificate, not like a Xerox of your birth certificate, but an original, authenticated document. I mean, good luck on that. And time and expense to get that. People just say, I'm not going to bother. Voting's not that important to me that I have to go through this hassle.
And does your passport have to be in your maiden name?
Your passport, the name in the passport would have to match your current name, which it probably would,
Yes,
right?
so it doesn't have to match your birth certificate, but just your
Right.
voting name.
But again, for those of us who don't have passports,
Exactly.
where are you gonna get the documentation? Yes, ma'am.
With absentee voting, early voting, and day of voting, is there anything currently that you would say is like the safest, best way to make sure? Is there any of them that you feel, I know I was enjoying being able to just send my ballot in, doing that, but over the last few years I've been more nervous about wanting to do that, so I've been going in on the day of, but
Right.
there's the question of, something happened on the day of, and, there's military, or there's whatever, I don't know what would happen. Do you have any sense of what might be your best bet?
Right, and and again, the Postal Service does a great job, but there are delays in the postal system. At this point, I would not mail my ballot back, it's too close. I would arrange for somebody to personally deliver it, and thankfully got a lot of options, right? Every community has to have a drop box. Personally, drop it in the drop box. You can personally deliver it to the clerk, right? Make sure it goes in. You can go to an early voting site and actually vote the ballot and put it in the machine. Done.
And you don't see any sort of, anyone protesting that, or saying that those
Well,
are going to count, or,
The president and his folks don't like it, but in terms of,
At this point,
right.
right now, currently.
But in terms of
saying that it's-
assuring yourself that the ballot has been cast, drop box, early voting, hand delivered to the clerk.
That last one is really satisfying.
The early voting?
Because they tell you exactly what they're gonna do with it.
Well, you can watch them. It goes into the machine.
Watch them.
And if there's a defect on the ballot, like crossing over, which our earlier speaker talked about, it'll kick the ballot back out and give you an opportunity to fix it. So early voting is a really great thing, and it started today, and it's for the next 9 days. And I hope increasingly people will use that.
Library.
Yeah, so if you're looking for assurance, that's it.
Yeah, I didn't like the drop box.
Yeah.
The issue about women's maiden names matching their current names, why would that affect Democrats differently than Republicans?
That one actually is a bipartisan issue, I acknowledge that. A little anecdote here, I told Pri this morning. The Republicans in the legislature tried to pass this ballot proposal through the legislature and put it on the ballot. And then they were told, oh, this will really affect married women who change their names, and all of a sudden the votes went away. It's like, oh, that's part of our base too. We don't want to vote for that. No, I acknowledge that. I know, yeah. That piece affects everybody. Yes.
Historically, the Carter Center has helped countries worldwide with voting. Can they do anything for us?
Well, they've actually sent observers into Michigan.
Not just Michigan, but nationally.
They do, but again, they don't have the resources to do, make it in Michigan, right? We got 5,200 precincts, several hundred local clerks. I mean, it's just, they just don't have the resources. But they have come into Michigan and helped on a very, very targeted basis.
So it's time to give more money to the Carter Center.
Well, there's other groups that could help as well in that sphere. But yes, they're one of them. Other questions? You've been a great audience. These are great questions. Anything else?
Well, I have a question, but this is a rumor, so I don't want to start one.
Turn off the camera.
But the rumor that I heard from somebody credible was that ICE officers are gonna be allowed in the polling stations in Marquette County and in the public viewing area. So I don't know if that's true or not, but the question I have is, what about weapons? What about weapons? I mean, the police come in with their bomb dogs and
Right.
they have weapons.
Police are
What
different.
about ICE officers?
So I don't recall all the laws off the top of my head about weapons. I think a weapon in a polling place or within that 100-foot radius of the door could be banned, and it may be or should be banned.
But it isn't banned, right?
Well, I'm not sure. I just want to be candid with you.
Okay.
That's something I'd have to look up to be sure. But people could show up outside that 100-foot radius, right, with weapons. I think we're an open carry state, are we not? So it's not illegal. But there's a difference between carrying a weapon and brandishing a weapon. Brandishing would be illegal and a threat, regardless of voter intimidation. And in that case, the local election officials, the election inspectors would call the local police. If somebody complained, saying, look, there's people out there brandishing weapons as I went into the polling place, I felt intimidated and threatened, please do something about it.
Well, but, I mean, if you see ICE officers, they have weapon ammo, just like police officers, and like in the precinct that I work in, the general population observer area, my line sneaks right by them.
Right.
Right there.
They would have the same limited rights as any member of the public to be there.
That's what I was told.
Right.
Okay.
Well, and then what would happen is, if in the judgment of the local workers, they were intimidating or threatening people, they'd be asked to leave or move their weapons. And if they didn't, then law enforcement would be called. I mean, all these situations, I never urge anybody to take the law into their hands. You call law enforcement in those kinds of situations. You alert the election inspectors because they're in charge on election day. And one of their top jobs is to keep that place secure and make sure voters vote without intimidation.
Okay, what happens when those places are private places, like schools and, well, not, but churches, for example, or a lot of polling places that don't allow weapons and have a right not to allow weapons?
Right. Well, on those days, that space is a public space, subject to state election law.
Good answer.
No, it's. Bree?
Real quick, I heard about mass challenges being launched against voters, which would put a whole burden on the courts. Have you heard?
More than heard. There's been a lot of that over the last several years from these election denial groups. But very firm instructions have gone out from the Bureau of Elections not to process mass challenges. If you want to challenge a voter's eligibility, you have to have specifics, and there's only a limited number of things you can challenge them on. And so it's still occurring out there, but in my experience, a lot of the clerks are just ignoring them at this point because they understand it's harassment.
My understanding in this county, or in this city at least, if you're a challenger and you keep running the same challenge time after time, the clerk will ask you to leave.
Yeah, if the question is about repeated challenges by a challenger, if there's no basis for them, if you're just repeating it to slow the process down or harass, yes, you can be booted and you should be booted out. You can be replaced by somebody else, but that person can be asked and be ordered to leave. Yes, ma'am.
Not a question, but I think it's just, you've done an excellent job, thank you, but it's discouraging. This is a relatively small, interested group, and, you just realize as you travel away from the city, all of these small areas, the rural areas of Michigan, they're not getting this information. And I'm not sure I don't know where they get it, and it's very frightening because I think so much is social media, and therefore, what do you believe? And I think that is a very frightening aspect of our elections right now. And I happened to mention to Sandy earlier, I was on Vote 411, and I was looking at all the candidates, and oh my goodness, none of the Republicans responded. I mean, a number of Republicans have not responded, you know, but I don't know, do people care? Maybe they like that.
Well, part of our job is to
Yeah,
urge them to care.
yeah.
Use your own social media circles in the positive way that we talked about a little bit ago. And the other good thing, again, in my experience, the vast majority of the local clerks, the election inspectors are conscientious, they do their job, they're not partisan. And the Bureau of Elections has been very strong, and they listen. These local clerks listen to what that Bureau tells them. So that gives me a lot of confidence as well in terms of the integrity of the system. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I also think it's important not to become too discouraged. I personally have seen a number of people have come in with great skepticism about elections. If you treat them respectfully and you help them see how it actually works, many of them convert and become actual poll workers later. And once they see how it actually works, they can be convinced. Now, I know there are people who are trying to sow discord and trying to spread misinformation, and you can't reach them. But don't think that you can't reach anybody. You can reach a lot of people. Most people will believe their eyes and show them how it works.
Yeah, no, that has been the experience. A number of these election deniers at least soften their attitudes if they're able to see.
Well, and unfortunately, the best way to do that is knock doors. So if you have the want or the ability to knock doors, I'm sure any candidate would be happy for you to do that. And you get to tell people exactly how the system works.
Have them go where we
One
go.
out of every 20 will listen to you.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there a rule in Michigan about the order in which ballots are counted? For example, mail-in ballots versus same-day ballots?
Well, what happens is now we have different systems of voting, right? So with the early voting, when you put that ballot in the machine is keeping a tabulation on the spot. That tabulation is not disclosed until election day, right? So that piece of it. On absentee ballots, when you send your envelope in by mail or drop it in a drop box or whatever, the clerks process the envelope. They make sure that it's from Brewer, right? And the handwriting and the signature matches. But then it waits until election day when the absentee counting board actually opens the envelope and tabulates the ballot. And they do that on election day and report their results to the clerk on election night. So this accounts for the way election results are coming in now. I mean, those tabulators from the early vote, those are immediately available on election day. Nothing's revealed till 8 o'clock, but those are there. Depending on the absentee counting board and its process, you may not get everything at once. I mean, in Detroit, and I worked in Detroit in 2020 when we had the riot outside the counting center. I was in that counting center. There were so many people that voted. They started on election day, and we didn't finish till the next morning, next afternoon actually. So that, was part of the process. And unfortunately, the president uses that as saying, aha, ballots are being delivered in the middle of the night, they're not being counted, and so. But again, if people would watch and see the process, they would understand that. So, that's why now, things are coming in at such a staggered basis, and it may be a day or two after the election before we have all of the results. And that's why, again, another important thing to stress, and bless the media, they're doing their work and others are doing their work. Everything that comes out on election day or shortly after is unofficial. It is unofficial until these boards of canvassers review it. They review the math, and they have the right to call in workers and question them if they think there's some issue there. Only they determine whether the election results are official. So I think that's another piece of it as well. People jump to conclusions, the results change, there must be some shenanigans going on. No, results come in a staggered basis. Yes, ma'am.
Every polling place, I think, has a day before the election when the equipment is actually open for the public to look at when they test it to make sure it works. And maybe if more people would be aware of that day they could see how the whole process takes place, how it's not
Right.
connected to the internet, all that stuff.
Yeah, the public testing, it's already occurred around the state. That day has passed. They don't open the machines, but they do test the software by
You
running.
can open the machine too and show them.
Not in those tests, they wouldn't. But, you're right. And, those things are pitifully attended, right? Nobody comes to watch when they could. Yeah.
What was the decision about ballots that are put in the mail before election day but don't arrive, postmarked, but don't arrive till after? Are they still counted?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, Michigan's rule is different. I'm going to be clear here. In Michigan, the ballot has to arrive by 8 o'clock on election day, except for overseas and military ballots. Other states allow non-military, non-overseas voters to have their votes come in after election day and be counted. But in Michigan, they have to arrive by 8 o'clock. We can change that law, but that's the current law. So get your ballots in by 8 o'clock on election day.
Wow, thank you so much.
Great,
Mark.
thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your attention and your great questions. And we'll have a few minutes where you can come and talk with Mark. I do want to mention to you that we have another program involving election security right here in Marquette County, September 2nd. Our usual usual membership meeting. We'll have the city clerk and the county clerk speaking about election security right here. And that will be in the Shiras and Heritage Rooms in the library. So that's the 2nd at 6:30. So come there too and bring questions. And again, I think that anything else that anyone has to mention that I've totally forgotten tonight? No? Well, then we'll thank Mark again and thank you all.